It was still dark when they knocked. You were already awake, had been for hours, your breath fogging up the window as you watched the outlines of Rome rise in silence. The tapping wasn't urgent, but it wasn't casual either. You knew before you opened the door, another rebellion. Another province slipping away from the center like a thread unraveling a worn tunic. You didn't flinch. You did what an emperor does. You listened, nodded, gave orders. But then you hesitated. Not because of gall, not because of betrayal, because you had a dream the night before, of your own funeral, and you woke up feeling relieved. It wasn't that you wanted to die. You just didn't want to keep pretending you weren't afraid of it. You are Marcus Aurelius, philosopher king, Stoic emperor. But in that quiet hour before the empire stirs, when the wax of the candle melts unevenly and the world feels like a question you forgot how to answer, you're not made of marble. You're a man. And you are afraid. You tell yourself what you've written 100 times. Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. But when the messenger leaves, when the guards return to their posts, when you are alone again in the echo of the morning, you feel the weight of hypocrisy pressing into your chest. You write to yourself like you always do, like a man penning secret letters to a future that might never come. You try to be brave on the page. You write, "Death is natural. Death is not evil. Death is only the end of motion." You close the journal. You breathe out slowly, but it still feels like a lie. They say Alexander the Great wept because there were no more worlds to conquer, but maybe he was just terrified of what came after. You think of that often, of all the great men who led armies, shaped maps, and trembled in their last moments. You remember your father, his breath growing shallow, his fingers gripping yours not out of pain, but uncertainty. He wasn't afraid of pain, he was afraid of fading, of becoming a whisper. No one teaches you how to die, not really. They give you swords, crowns, philosophies, but the silence behind the curtain, no man can explain that. Still, you try. You stand in front of your soldiers and speak of honor, of fate, of Rome. You eat with them in the cold. You laugh when the wine is passed around. You are the face of calm. But when the fire dims and sleep returns, you wake again, heart pounding, trying to remember what it felt like not to fear. One night, you sit beside the dying, a soldier from Hispania. His name is Gaius, and he once carried your standard into battle. "Are you afraid?" you ask him softly. He doesn't answer right away. Then, with a cracked voice, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of not knowing if it mattered." You don't know what to say to that. It's the same thing that curls around your own ribs in the quiet. The Senate writes of glory. History scribes will sculpt your memory into something immortal. But will you be there to see it? To feel it? Probably not. You remember reading that the Egyptians used to keep a skull at the dinner table so no one forgot to live. You've written in your own journals, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." But writing and believing are two different things. Your tutor Rusticus once said, "Philosophy is not armor, it's a lamp." You didn't understand what he meant until now. You've been trying to use Stoicism as a shield, against grief, against fate, against death itself. But maybe it's just a small light in the dark. Not strong enough to stop what's coming, but enough to show you where you stand. The real irony: you've led armies into the teeth of war, but death, that quiet, invisible visitor, is the one opponent you still flinch to face. That's the part you never wrote down. That your greatest battle wasn't against barbarians or betrayal, it was against the shadow at the edge of your own thoughts. And tonight it returns. In the hush of your tent, you stare at the candle again. It flickers without fear. You envy it. But then something strange happens. A messenger arrives, not with news of war, but of a man. A prisoner, a criminal, they say, who speaks in riddles. But not of gods or treason. He speaks only of death, and why it is not to be feared. You feel the smallest shift, not curiosity, not hope, but something unfamiliar. A pause in the storm. You give the order, "Bring him to me." He sits across from you in chains. But it's not the iron around his wrists that holds your attention, it's the calm behind his eyes. like he's not waiting to be judged, but simply passing through. You don't speak first, you're the emperor, but he doesn't speak either. Eventually, you break the silence. They say you've made peace with death. He shrugs, as if you've asked whether he prefers figs to olives. I don't see it as a peace. More like remembering. You narrow your gaze. Remembering what? That I was never promised tomorrow. You lean back, arms folded. The tent is dim, lit only by the fire behind you, casting long shadows over the maps and manuscripts stacked around the room. This man doesn't look like a rebel. He looks like someone who's seen the end already and didn't look away. He speaks again, not asking permission. They fear me because I told them dying isn't personal. It's just a door. Sometimes open, sometimes closed. You feel your breath catch, but only slightly. You've read Epictetus. You've memorized the Stoic tenets. You've written 1,000 lines about the indifference of nature and the necessity of fate. But you've never heard anyone say it like this. Not with poetry, but with peace. Were you a soldier, you ask? He shakes his head. I was a potter, until my hands failed me. Then I became a teacher. But no one wants lessons from a dying man unless he speaks about death. And now? I suppose I'm your prisoner, but truthfully, I've never felt freer. There's something in the way he says it that needles you. You, the ruler of the most powerful empire on earth, feel less free than a man in chains. A guard shifts behind him, trying not to cough. The prisoner turns his head slightly, then returns his gaze to you. You fear dying, he says simply. You stiffen. I understand death. But you fear it. You want to deny it. Raise your voice, assert control, but that's not how you've ruled, and it's not who you are when you're honest with yourself. Instead, you ask him, why don't you? He smiles gently. Because death is not the thief, fear is. A silence hangs, heavy and pulsing. Outside, wind rustles the flaps of the tent. Inside, everything stands still. You think of your son, of the illness that haunts him, of your wife's quiet sobs when she thinks you're asleep, of the speeches you give about fate while clutching your robe with whitening knuckles. Many people still debate the results of motivation, whether fear of death pushes us forward or paralyzes us. Some say it builds empires, others say it destroys men. You wonder quietly which camp you're in. You say death is just a door, you finally say, but what if there's nothing on the other side? He chuckles. Then that's peace. You've returned to the place you were before birth, and you weren't complaining then, were you? It sounds like something you would write, but it feels different coming from a man who expects the noose by morning. You study him. No twitching fingers, no sweat, no tremor in his voice. Teach me something, you say suddenly. He tilts his head, amused. Now? Yes, before you die. He nods once, then says, every morning say to yourself, today I may meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil, and then choose not to be offended. You blink. That's one of my own meditations. I know, he says, but you haven't been living it. And there it is, the door. Not the one that leads to death, the one that leads to yourself. You don't know whether to be insulted or grateful. He sees through you in a way few do. The Senate flatters, the soldiers fear, the philosophers quote, but this man recognizes you. And somehow that makes you feel smaller, but lighter too. You look around your tent, the war maps, the treaties, the scrolls filled with rules and doctrines and laws, all of them drawn to control life. But what if life isn't meant to be controlled? You dismiss the guards. The prisoner stays seated, unshaken. What's your name? You ask. Call me what you wish. Very well, you say. Then tell me this. What would you do if this were your last night? He glances at the fire. I'd do exactly what I'm doing now. Sitting, breathing, speaking honestly. You nod. But your mind is far away now. You see a child, you at 7, clutching your grandfather's hand at a funeral. You remember asking him why people close their eyes when they die. So they can see clearly, he whispered. You thought he was lying then. Now, maybe not. The prisoner rises as if on cue. The guards tense, but you raise a hand. He bows slightly. Your fear is not failure, Marcus. It is only an echo. Let it fade. He turns to go, but before he reaches the flap, you call out, "What if I forget this moment?" He smiles without turning back. Then life will remind you again. It always does. And just like that, he's gone. You're left alone with your scrolls. But your mind is somewhere else entirely. The next day, you order the prisoner's release. No one questions you. That night, you sit beneath the stars, no parchment, no ink, only silence. And for the first time in many years, you are not afraid to fall asleep. You stand at the edge of the battlefield, not as a symbol, not as a statue cast in bronze and valor, but as a man. The rain hasn't stopped for 3 days. Mud clings to your boots like a second skin. Soldiers wait behind you, their faces stern, but their eyes searching yours for something. Maybe hope, maybe courage, maybe permission to be afraid. You say nothing. Instead, you step forward, into the rain, into the cold, into the unknown. And they follow, not because of your orders, but because you walk without looking back. They say a general leads with confidence, but you've learned something truer. A real leader walks with acceptance, not of defeat, but of truth. And truth is, not all of you will see the end of this week. Once, this would have crippled you. You would have lain awake, wondering who would fall, how they'd scream, what it would mean. Now it only humbles you. You know what comes. The wind does not lie, and yet, there's no panic. You finally understand something the prisoner tried to teach you without saying it aloud. You don't need more time. You only need to stop wasting the time you already have. It isn't fear that holds people back. It's forgetting. Forgetting that every sunrise is a countdown. Forgetting that life is not owed, it is borrowed. Forgetting that we are not gods, but flickers of light in the vast night sky. Your old self, the one that clung to fear like armor, he would have tried to dominate fate, to wrestle meaning from chaos. But now you realize fate is not a beast to be tamed. It is the teacher you ignored when you thought you already knew the answers. The soldiers ready their weapons, you ready your breath. And suddenly you remember something odd, something small. Your mother used to hum to herself when she cooked, just before dusk. She never sang words, only melodies, looping softly like prayers no one taught her. You never thought much of it, but now you hear it again, in the rhythm of the march, in the shuffle of boots, in the gentle beat of the earth beneath you. That melody lives in you. You smile. Death is not the enemy, it's the punctuation. And punctuation, Marcus, does not erase the sentence, it completes it. You ride without fanfare, without trumpet or drum. That night, you write again in your journal, but not as a philosopher speaking to himself. You write like someone who has seen what lies beyond the curtain and returned, not with answers, but with peace. Let death find me planting my olive tree, you write, though the world ends tomorrow. You fall asleep beneath the stars, your cloak wet, the wind curling at your feet like a cat that knows its master is finally still. Somewhere, a fire dies down. Somewhere else, a child is born. And in between those two silences, you continue. Breathing, writing, walking forward. You dream of the prisoner again, only this time he's unchained. And you are no longer afraid. So now, here you are. No armies, no scrolls, no echoes of the Senate. Just breathe, just thought. Death is no longer a terror beneath your bed, no longer the shadow that stiffens your smile, no longer the clock ticking behind your every victory. You've stopped running, not because you've reached the end, but because you've realized there was nowhere to run to. The destination was never beyond the hills or across the seas or in the next chapter of your legacy. It was here, always here, in the heartbeat you ignored, in the flame you feared would vanish, in the silence between your words. There's a softness now, like the last light of day slipping through temple columns, like a feather resting on the floor after the owl has flown. And you wonder, how long has this been waiting for you? The peace, the understanding, the whisper that says, you were never meant to stay. You were meant to be. You close your eyes, not to shut out the world, but to see it better, to feel the weight of it pressing not on your shoulders, but into your soul. You think again of your younger self, wide-eyed, desperate for answers, clinging to control. You smile at him. You forgive him. And the last thing you write, not on parchment, but in the air, in the quiet, is not a conclusion. It's a release, a letting go. Because maybe after all this time, death wasn't a wall, it was a door. And you've already walked through it, softly, without fear, without noise, like a whisper, still floating somewhere in the room.